Today's story comes with a warning. This one's not for the faint of heart. This is a story about an Ohio man who lined his 3 boys up and extinguished their lives execution style. We're going to be reviewing some video clips, some 911 calls, as well as the police footage in today's video. Hello everybody and welcome back to the sofa, which is right behind me. Y'all, today Roscoe was like, he can't handle it. He was like, can't do it. This one is bad. So he is under the sofa with his blankie. And I do go ahead and give you all a trigger warning about today's story. Y'all, this one, so many of you hit me up about this and were like, Paul, will you look at this? Will you look at that? So I started kind of compiling all of the videos that y'all were sending me to look at. And if you follow me for a while, then you know that a lot of times what we'll follow something is we'll look at clips and whatnot. And that's what we're going to do in today's video. Now, what I do like to do first is to go over like kind of a 30-second, 60-second, or probably longer overview of what the case is, the baseline of it, if you will, so that we're all on the same page before we begin reviewing some of the information about it. So let's go ahead and talk about exactly what happened in Ohio and who Chad Doerman is. Now, this took place about 20 miles outside of Cincinnati in the town of Monroe Township. Deputies would respond to a home in Monroe shortly before 4:30 on Thursday. Now, they received 2 911 calls, and we'll listen to a couple of clips from them. Now, one was from like apparently a mother. She was screaming that her babies had been shot. Another one was from a passing motorist who said a girl was running down the street saying my stepdad's killing everybody. They are absolutely excruciating calls. Now, Doerman later would allegedly confess to lining up his 3 sons and shooting them one after another. When the deputies would arrive to the home, they would find these 3 boys scattered throughout the yard. None of the boys would live. Authorities would say that Chad would confess that one of the sons was able to escape, but that he retrieved him and brought him back before executing him. Now, the mother and his stepdaughter did survive. Now, the mother would take a shot to the hand while trying to protect her babies. Now, one of the things about this case that I was just literally dumbfounded over was watching some of the body cam footage. Now, before we get to that, we need to start with, what kind of not kicked it off, but the 911 phone calls, because those are just as chilling. Now, also, before we get started, I do want to say, first of all, down in the description, I put links to where you can watch the full versions of these, because I'm only going over bits and pieces of them here. And also, please remember, I'm not a cop, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a shrink, I'm not any of those credentialed fancy things. I'm just a guy with a sofa behind me, and so all of this is my opinion. It's alleged and it's for entertainment purposes only. I do, suggest, implore, you do your own research, come to your own conclusions, and talk about it down in the comment section below. Now, all that, little stuff being said, let's go ahead and listen to a couple of those clips of the 911 phone calls. And again, I was going to say it again, trigger warning, if you're, this is not for the faint of heart, any of this. And I'm getting some of the, not as bad parts of the stuff to listen to and watch and whatnot. But just know that if this type of stuff bothers you, this video might not be for you.
There's a girl running down the street saying that her stepfather is killing everyone in her family. It's on the corner of where there's a body shop and the fire department. Do you know what road this is?
Okay. I'm across the street at Lindale Automotive.
Can you tell how many people have been shot?
I think 2 children.
Okay.
Y'all, I already have goosebumps. I mean, can you imagine seeing this? You're driving down the street, a girl stops you and tells you this information. You're across the street. I think a couple of kids have been killed. They would have no idea of the carnage that was unfolding, right? Absolutely bone-chilling. Now, what is even more bone-chilling, though, and this is the part that got me, that many of you sent to me to watch, is the body cam footage of them apprehending Chad. Now, this is via Long Crime Network. Again, I put the link to their channel or to the specific video down below, because I've only taken a couple of excerpts out from this. Now, I will say that they have blacked out on the screen where the bodies of the children are. And again, we're only watching a little bit of it here, but this is a hardcore trigger warning, okay? One thing I want you to pay attention to, and we'll talk about afterwards, is his demeanor, okay? Because I'm like, for what just happened, This dude is just like completely chill, right? So let's go ahead and watch that. Now also, if you have dogs or pets around you, give them trigger warning because there's like barking and stuff like that, so they're getting ready to go off. So just know that before we press play on this.
Stand up! Stand up now! Stand up! Stand the fuck up! Get your hands out of here. 72. Tell them 21. It's in the air.
Now in that clip, that's where they're going up to him. He's just sitting there like he's having a glass of sweet tea, waving to the neighbors. Now you saw, if you didn't just rewind, the rifle that was sitting next to him, and then you saw the blackout spot. So he's sitting there, his dead son, feet away from him, just chilled out. It gets worse. Let's continue.
What are you doing, man?
Hey, are you copying all this?
Can I roll over? I ain't gonna hurt you. I ain't gonna hurt nobody.
You got anything on you?
No, I ain't got nothing, man. Phone, that's it. I ain't mad. I ain't nothing. Just make sure that dog don't come out. I don't think he'll bite you. Just don't reach for him and try to grab him and pet him.
All right.
He won't bite you.
What's going on, man?
Nothing. Can I stand up? It's kind of uncomfortable.
I'm gonna
I
get
ain't
you
gonna
here
do
in a
nothing. I ain't
second.
running away. You can do whatever you want with me.
Can I stand up? It's kind of uncomfortable. Now this is the part right here that just it chills me to my bone. Happy-go-lucky. Hey, you mind if I roll over? It's kind of uncomfortable. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt anybody. Your 3 children are dead. You can hear who I'm assuming is the mother or somebody in the background. There's so little. There's bodies scattered all over the yard. And he's so calm and collected. Telling them how to approach the dog, so that he won't bite. I'm just... I'm literally speechless. Let's watch the last clip of this.
Can you get the wallet out of my back pocket?
Shut up, dude. You had the right to remain silent.
That cop talked to him the way we would all want to. Just like, dude, you just killed 3 young boys, your sons, your children. And the way he's so nonchalant about it, I've never in my life. But oftentimes when we look at these family annihilators, look at Chris Watts. He got up on the porch, talking about, I wish they would have come home, So that part, even though it shocks me every time, and I don't think it will ever not shock me, we've seen enough of this to kind of be like, okay, this is typically a trait of these type personalities and whatnot. Now let's continue on into some of the next clips. And what I want to do now is I want to hear from some of the neighbors, because, and not in the neighbors, but like family and stuff like that, because you're going to hear some, I would say, conflicting stories a little bit, but also it's going to shine a little bit more light into it, because usually somewhere in the middle, and also depending on where it's coming from, is the truth. So let's watch one of the neighbors say what he thought of Mr. Chad.
He was an asshole.
Richard Kincannon tells me Chad Doerman had a temper. He told me he witnessed him often treating his wife and kids poorly.
You felt like he was just angry, generally speaking.
He was every day. Heard him. There wasn't a day he didn't yell at his wife and kids out there.
What would he yell?
All kinds of shit. He was just angry, yelling at her all the time, treating her like.
Now, I absolutely love this neighbor because he's so real, right? He's like, dude's a you-know-what hole, clearly, right? Now, I think this guy's perspective is interesting because here's a dude who lives across the street. And, he's like, every day he's yelling at these kids, he's yelling at the wife, yelling at, he's an angry person. And if you've dealt with people who are extremely angry at the world itself, then you can kind of relate to this a little bit, like someone like that. Now, maybe not that they would take it to the extent of, annihilating their family or their sons and whatnot, or attempting to annihilate the entire family, but this one was successful with his sons. Now, my belief so far, and again, this has not gone to court, it hasn't gone like the trial, all that. I believe this was him getting back at his wife. 100%. That was a component of it, right? Now, again, that's my sofa opinion, right? I'm not credentialed to give any kind of expert thing, but that's just how I feel about it. This has that vibe. You know, for these cases that we've watched where the perpetrator, often the husband, will annihilate the children. What also very much reminded me of and took me back to the trial was, I believe it was Tim Jones Jr., who annihilated all the children, essentially to get back at his, estranged wife. So let's continue to listen to what some of the other neighbors had to say, and as well as the same gentleman.
So when you look at that house now, what do you see?
You honestly want to know?
Yeah, I do.
I still see the babies sitting in the yard, laying in the yard. One was right there by the tree, right by the road, not even 20 feet from the road right there. This is where that dude laid him. Laid the one up there right beside that silver truck to the left of the tire, about 5 foot. That's all I see every time I come out here. That's why I try to look at that, focus on.
Can you imagine? How would you ever get these horrifying images out of your mind, right? And that's what we often talk about here at the Sofa Squad is, when you look at all this dynamic of the victims that happen in these cases, obviously the ones that lose their lives, but then all the way out to the rescue workers who show up, which we'll hear the prosecutor talk about that, and I'm glad he does, and we'll look at that later in one of the clips. But here's the neighbor. He goes out and it's images of these dead children in the yard across the street, right? I mean, you can never unsee that. Now let's hear what another neighbor has to say.
I'm shocked, to be honest with you. We moved here 6 years ago, and the place is great, and New Richmond's coming up, and you just hate to see anything like this anywhere.
All of a sudden I hear boom, boom, and at like 5 more, I'm like, that's 7 shots. That's shots. Like, there's no way. So I was freaking out like this before I got ready and everything, and I don't know, man. Before that, I saw 2 cars right here on this street zoom as fast as humanly possible. It was like something's going down.
One thing that stuck out to me with this clip is that in another part of it and whatnot, in some articles that I read, they were like, this is a quiet neighborhood. So often when we see these crimes take place, we hear the same narrative, and it's this doesn't happen here, not here, not here, but it so often happens these days. It is so scary to see where things are at right now in the world and in our own backyards.
Played their last baseball game on Wednesday night, and their coaches tell us it's hard to believe that was their final time running around the bases.
Now, I wanted to use that just to introduce, we're getting ready to hear from some of the coaches, and y'all, this part, because the boys apparently loved baseball and whatnot, we're going to hear from the coaches, and this is absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, the whole thing's heartbreaking, right? But when you start to hear these coaches talk about these boys, I mean, it's just, and again, they're so young. That's the part that blows my mind. So much life ahead of them. But also when we listen to some of these clips, listen to what some of the people say where they're like, I just saw him with them like a couple of days ago, right? Like, we didn't even think this was going to happen. But oftentimes that's what we see. It's out of left field that these type tragedies and horrific events take place.
They're more than teammates and they're more than friends. Like, you start to become more of a little family.
Dwayne Kuhn saw the pitcher in this 7-year-old as his baseball coach.
He was feisty, and when he's at bat, he's feisty, and I could see him on the mound just being a feisty little left-hander.
He was telling the boys, get in their car seats, be safe. You would have not thought anything. Just normal, typical conversations with another family on the ball field.
Now, that's the part that I was talking about, was when we heard the lady speaking of, I just saw them, he was strapping them in the car seats, making sure they're safe. Just normal stuff, right? And that's just part of the absolute tragedy of it. Now, listening to the coach talking about him being a feisty left-hander and whatnot, think about all the people, the parents that were on these teams that knew this family, that knew them, and was like, my gosh, right? This could happen to us. Like, what prevents somebody we know from flipping out like this and whatnot? It's absolutely so scary. Now, one thing, just while I'm thinking of it, to me in this case, that sticks out, because they each kind of usually have a component that is horrifying, to be honest. And for this one, it was the methodical part of it, the taking the rifle, the execution style, but also, and like I mentioned in the beginning, where he went and retrieved one of the boys and brought him back. It's like, my God, if you could have just like reached back in time and helped at least one get away, right? I mean, obviously all of them, but absolutely horrifying. Now, what I'm going to do for this next thing is I want to put up a clip here of a news article. And this is from the Daily Beast. And I want to put this up here. I want to read through it real quick and talk about what it's saying, which is in relation to the father, his father, talking about this scenario, because it's a little bit of a different perspective. So let's read this and we'll talk about it. So it says that Chad's father, Keith, he's 59, said that he and his wife were still trying to comprehend how their son could have allegedly killed his own boys, but he added they have no answers and he just snapped. He said there was something going on in his life that he couldn't handle no more. I can't talk to him. They aren't letting me talk to him. He probably hid a lot of stuff from me. Chad's father said he had just visited his son last week. He seemed fine, Keith said. He was a jokester, a fun-loving guy. He also insisted that Chad did not have a criminal history or mental illness. Chad was once charged in a 2010 domestic violence incident, which he had allegedly choked his father. However, the case was dismissed when Keith failed to appear as a witness for the prosecution. The elder Doerman told the Post that the account recorded by the Cincinnati Enquirer was incorrect and that the judge dismissed the case. Now, here's my thing with this particular article and this little excerpt from it. Oftentimes in these cases that we review, we see this where one person has one version of somebody and the next has a different version, right? And I think that that could be said for everybody. Everyone sees this in a different way, and especially when it comes to your parents. They're going to have a different experience with you. Now, one thing that I think is interesting is the father saying in this publicly he's never had a history of mental illness, of anything like this, because when this starts to come down the pipeline for the trial, I'm very curious what we're going to see. Is he going to plead out? I mean, apparently he's been very forthcoming, like, yep, this is what I did, type of situation. And so I'm very curious, because this could definitely, in my opinion, bite him in the butt if he tries any kind of insanity or anything like that, because the dad's like, yeah, no, he's fine. And again, imagine wrapping your mind around, my 3 grandsons were just taken out. And one day, just like that, gone. I just saw them last week, and son's laughing, joking, and whatnot. And here we are. He's just killed my 3 grandsons. I mean, how do you even begin to process that? Now, what I'd like to do is to look at some clips from the arraignment where the bail is set and kind of hear the story through the prosecution talking, the DA, and see what they have to say. And we're going to make some commentary on it in between the clips.
The incomprehensible cruelty of the father that stands before you lined up his 3 young boys, and he executed them in his own home with a rifle. They were ages 3, 4, and 7, Judge. In an act of desperation to save her children, the mother at some point grabbed the gun. The father of the boys was able to flee into a field near the home. And again, we know from his admission, father hunted that boy down, drug him back to the property, and executed him in front of witnesses.
Can you absolutely imagine watching this happen? Can you imagine that mother's heart? Surviving this scenario, taking a bullet to the hand, trying to grab the gun, seeing him methodically kill each of their children. I mean, my God, it's just what, I don't even know what to say about it. Now, also, sitting there looking at him in his little turtle suit, of course they're going to have him in that, right? I often think, number one, what are these deputies standing there next to him thinking about him? But also, now he's going to cry. Now he's going to start crying. I'm like, why now, right? And I don't believe these tears. I don't think that they're for the boys. I don't think that at all. It might be the realization of, oh, I'm locked up, I'm this, I'm that, like, who knows, right? But I'm like, yeah, now's not the time for that, buddy. Like, it would have been before that to have made the decision to not have done this. Let's watch the next clip.
This was the man that every day they woke up looking to for protection, love, guidance in all things. Man they trust more than any other person on earth. The person they rely upon to keep them safe from harm. He was their world. He was their guardian. And he executed them in cold blood. We know that from his admission.
Don't cry over it now, buddy. Don't even try that little card. Now, number 2, interesting that he has, they're saying from his admission, this type thing. The way the gentleman is laying this out, it hits very heavy. This was their father. These little boys that probably looked up to this man. Whether he's yelling at them every day and all this kind of stuff, they're still going to look up to him as their hero, right? What is the lesson to be learned for their little souls? Coming to this earth for such a short time, and their last moments being the realization that their hero, their protector, their father is who is taking them out. Imagine the last one who had to realize that his brothers went. Hearing the mother scream. I mean, I cannot fathom leaving the earth in this way.
One of the most monstrous, craven, cowardly acts that will ever be our misfortune to see. To make things even more disturbing, Judge, this was no haphazard act. Again, by his own admission, he planned the event on a whim.
Now, this part right here is very chilling to me, to hear that he's admitted that, yeah, he was planning this. So imagine that he was going through all of this, planning this up along the way. Now, I've also read in other articles and whatnot about how he changed his Facebook profile to be a picture of the boys a few days beforehand, was like posting stuff like that on there. So it really makes you wonder, are we going to find out just how exactly much was he planning this day of carnage?
They held these boys in their arms, knowing there was nothing they could do to save them. How long do those scars last?
Now, what he's referring to are first responders, people like this who are on the scene. And again, it makes you always wonder with these cases that we watch, the damage that is done in regard to people who, didn't even know these people probably before this day where they, their lives intersected. And to sit there and show up to a scene like this and to see all these small children dead, you're realizing with each one, they're already dead. You can't do anything. And to be somebody who shows up on that scene and to carry that with you, and then imagine going home to your own children that night. I mean, you would want to hug them even tighter, right? But also the realization of just how could you point a gun at this little person and pull the trigger? Your own flesh and blood, it makes no sense, but I don't think it's supposed to.
As his prior record goes, Judge, it is fairly minimal. He was charged with domestic violence in 2010. He is not, to my knowledge, on probation committee control.
Now, this is that charge they were referring to, that the father is saying, look, that was a mix-up, it was this and that. And again, oftentimes when we hear from the family members and whatnot, I would expect the father to downplay it a little bit. I mean, after all, this is his son, right? He doesn't want to think my son's a cold-blooded murderer, and, maybe he was downplaying it. Maybe he's completely right. But I imagine we'll get the true details to this if and when this does go to trial.
But at this point, this juncture, we're going to ask this court to issue a bond we've never asked for before. I'm going to ask for a bond of $20 million. I hope I never need to request such a bond again.
Thank you. Date for preliminary hearing?
The date for the preliminary hearing, Judge, is 6/26.
So June 26th, we have the preliminary hearing. We're going to be looking out for that. $20 million bail. Can you imagine? I mean, it should be no bail in my opinion. The same thing as no bail, right? And good on them for doing that. And I like how he worded this to the judge. I hope I never have to ask for another bail again. It's very significant. Now I want to kind of round this out with looking at the GoFundMe. And I'm going to put it up here on the screen and we can talk about it. Now you see here it says, help my sister bury her children. My sister lost her 3 amazing babies yesterday. Nothing will make this better. It will never be okay. But please, if you can find it in your heart to help relieve the financial burden of this tragedy, please donate. No one should have to go through this. And you see it's up to $230,000, and this was, you're probably watching this a couple of days after I recorded it, but the links to that in the description below. And you see the 3 boys, their older stepsister here. So again, this case, absolutely senseless, absolutely monstrous. It absolutely floors me how calm and peace he was. So again, I'll say this. I do think that this was some form of getting back at her. This was obviously usually about power, stuff like that. And again, I don't know. I'm not, doctor or any of that stuff, like I said. But this just feels like so many other cases like this that we've seen where, the father is getting back, right? And he does it so through the children. I imagine we'll learn more about it. So I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. What are your opinions? What are your thoughts? What do you think the motivation is for this? Drop it in the comments down below. If you're still watching, drop some sofas. We're still trying to get Roscoe back in here by leaving sofas down in the comment section. But also show love to the victims with some hearts and whatnot. And that's it. If you're still watching, I do appreciate it. And until we gather around all this stuff right here and talk about these crazy headlines, I'll see y'all soon.